My name is Lenin. I'm an environmental lawyer and I'm based in Zimbabwe. I work with the People and Earth Solidarity Law Network, or PS lawyers for short. What I can say is that Lynn has summed up very well the context in which we are discussing about elephants, the welfare of animals in Zimbabwe, as well as the wildlife trade transparency. The laws, there's generally secrecy, there's lack of access to information on wildlife trade in Zimbabwe. But the laws, fortunately, provide for a number of animal and environmental rights, and that's where we come in mostly as environmental lawyers and as activists. So generally, this is an outline of my presentation in the time that I'm given. I will give an overview. I will talk a bit about African elephant politics. I also go briefly into the Zimbabwe's legal and police framework on wildlife trade and on animal welfare. And then I also sum up with some of the challenges and opportunities that is presented by the current laws and that is also presented by the current context. Then I will go on a way forward where I give a number of suggestions or a number of recommendations that I feel are critical in order for us to keep on preserving our wildlife. So in terms of the overview, I'm sure you can see a picture of Robert Mugabe there. And today is a day when, if we're talking about Zimbabwe, we also have to mention that a number of people are mourning, and some are neutral about this morning's passing on of Robert Mugabe. Why I mentioned Robert Mugabe here, it's not just that I'm giving an overview of Zimbabwe and he's the founding president, he's the founding leader. But in 1990, President Mugabe issued a decree for the protection of some elephants in Hwange National Park. These were known as the presidential elephants. Of course, since then, a lot has happened, and some have talked about those presidential elephants that some say they are diminishing. But at those moments in the early 90s, he was one of the African leaders who were concerned about the protection of Zimbabwe's elephants. Of course, as time went on, lots of things changed. So the other thing to note about Zimbabwe is that obviously it is a Southern African state and it has got an outspoken history of wildlife management. There are quite a number of stakeholders. I'm still giving the overview. There are also a number of stakeholders when we are talking about animal welfare or the trade in wild elephants in Zimbabwe. So I'll just give an overview of some of these key stakeholders. We have the ZimParks, which is the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority. That's like the main authority that is mandated with looking after Zimbabwe's wildlife. It's a product of the Parks and Wildlife Act, which is one of the critical legislations dealing with wildlife in Zimbabwe. It also houses the CITES management and scientific authorities in Zimbabwe. It falls under the Ministry of Environment, which is also the government department that is directly responsible for wildlife management. Then we also have what we call the Joint Operational Command, where we have ZimParks aligning with the security sectors, Zimbabwe Republic Police, the army, mostly on campaigns against poaching. Also have safari operators. We have a number of civil society organizations, SPCA, Veterans for Animal Welfare, ourselves, and other organizations that are also concerned with animal welfare. Then the rural communities, they also take center stage when we are discussing animal welfare in Zimbabwe, as well as international bodies, non-profit organizations, international NGOs. So that's the overview when we are talking about wildlife trade and transparency in Zimbabwe. So I will move on to the political aspects. Zimbabwe and other SADC countries were at CITES COP recently, and indeed they lost a considerable battle, especially the positions that they were pushing for, one of which is for them to be allowed to trade in ivory stockpiles, as well as also to trade in live animals beyond their natural range. But they won the vote to keep the African elephant populations in Southern Africa, to keep them within Appendix 2, but obviously with certain conditions. So if we are to look at the political context within Southern Africa, you would appreciate that the fight for animal rights within Southern Africa is challenging. It is rocky, and at times it is even dangerous because of the interlinks between the politics, the interests, and the sensitivities that are involved. So it is really brave that we have a number of people here around Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe and South Africa, and in all these countries, who are still fighting for animal rights, who are still fighting for animal welfare, or who are just fighting for environmental justice and accountability. Then I will go on to give an overview of our legal and police framework, of the legal and police framework in Zimbabwe. So we have quite a number of laws and policies that deal with animal welfare, that deal with these elephants in captivity in Zimbabwe. Lynn talked a bit about some of them, so I will just summarize. We have the Constitution of Zimbabwe, and that is the supreme law of Zimbabwe. It is a 2013 document when it was passed in a referendum. And it provides for a number of rights that can be utilized in protecting animal welfare and environmental rights. And this is one of the key documents that we have also been utilizing in our public interest environmental litigation concerning the trade transparency. So the Constitution contains a number of rights that can be utilized by environmental rights activists. It provides for the right to access information, any information that is held by public bodies, any person, the media, and citizens have the right to access such information, and that is Section 62 of our Constitution. It also provides for public accountability and for principles of public finance management. It also provides for the right for various environmental rights in Section 73. Then we also have the Parks and Wildlife Management Act, and under this we have one key subsidiary legislation, or a statutory instrument that falls under the Parks and Wildlife Management Act, known as the Parks and Wildlife Import and Export Wildlife Regulations of 1998. That statutory instrument provides for a number of contains a number of provisions that can be used in defending animal rights in Zimbabwe. It also provides for condition of exporting, the conditions that should be met when a part or when an institution is exporting Zimbabwe's wildlife. We have the Environmental Management Act, which sort of expands the environmental rights captured in Section 73 of our Constitution. Zimbabwe is also a signatory to a number of international environmental and wildlife treaties, such as the CITES Convention, where it is also supposed to abide by various wildlife transportation regulations, also part of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And at the regional level, we have the SADC Protocol on Wildlife Conservation and Law Enforcement. So this is quite a rich legal and policy framework. The major problem then comes with the implementation, and that's when most of the organizations, that's where most of us are concerned to see that if we have such a considerable body of laws, if we have these policies, why are they not being implemented? That's when we step in, as I mentioned earlier. So, having looked at this body of laws and policies, I will also share what we have done as an organization. We have worked with other concerned organizations in requesting for information. We felt that when we were hearing this news about wildlife capture, about the cruel methods of capture that were being utilized to take these elephants, about the lack of transparency that has already been mentioned, the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, we felt that the first step was for us, obviously, to request for this information on trade transparency and to monitor these capture methods. And so we wrote a number of letters to the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority, some of these letters were ignored and some were responded to, but the information was not adequate. So we ended up partnering with other organizations, SPCA, Veterans for Animal Warfare, Zimbabwe Elephants Foundation, and we came up with a parliamentary petition. Yeah, that's just a screenshot of the parliamentary petition on the extreme left. Unfortunately, it can't be seen, but we came up with this parliamentary petition. We also came up with a court application, which is an ongoing action in Zimbabwe right now. I think that's a news report here in the Sunday Times talking about that court action where it says NGO demands details of Zim's government elephant trade with China. Basically, we were issuing a number of requests, such as we felt that we needed to know the number of elephants that are being exported at any government members, at any moment, the ages of the elephants, the final specific destinations, the method of capture, the buyers and other applicants we have requested to purchase the elephants, the prices, the exact export dates, because all that information was not readily available. Then we also participated, again with the support of a number of organizations, we also participated in the CITES COP18. So I will move on to some of the challenges that I feel we continue to face and other organizations continue to face in terms of the legal and police framework, or in terms of general protection for elephants. There's the issue of poaching, illegal wildlife trade, and then there's also the abuse of the rule of law by governments or by institutions that are supposed to abide by the law and that are supposed to protect these animals. There's also the issue of lack of transparency when it comes to wildlife trade. The information is not readily available. There's lack of public accountability. The capture methods are very cruel, as most people here from a scientific background would attest. There's the issue of secrecy, and there's also limited knowledge among some decision makers, because we, in our journey, also encountered that a number of parliamentarians were willing to come to our cause, but they also lacked such information, such knowledge about the importance of these animals. There are also the Animal Rights Board of Laws, even though they are a bit comprehensive, they are also still less developed if we are to compare with other regions. And also there's lack of public awareness. However, I will go on to the opportunities. The first opportunity is that we have some rules and regulations, but then the implementation, like I mentioned earlier, is the challenge. We also have committed animal rights and environmental law networks. We are also seeing increasing research and advocacy. I'm sure at this meeting, there are quite a number of books on these issues. And also gatherings and forums such as this one, which is the first Elephants in Captivity. And we also have the opportunities for regional cooperation by conservation groups and NGOs. So as a way forward, my last slide. As a way forward, I think we need more awareness raising. We need more training, especially for these policymakers, for the communities, utilization of social media, need more advocates, meetings to explain what occurs at these CITES meetings and other international meetings, animal rights monitoring, law and policy research and analysis, more public interest litigation, training and mobilization of community-based monitors. Yeah, thank you.